por estar acá. Les quiero presentar al profesor Wayne Ross, que es de la University of British Columbia, en Vancouver, Canadá, donde les invito a imaginar sacar su doctorado, su maestría. Tienen una maestría en estudios sociales que yo no he visto en otros programas. Y la verdad es que lo del inglés, chiquillos, eso es algo que se come fácil. O sea, ahí se meten a cualquier cosillo, ya con eso les dio para sobrevivir en cualquier, sobre todo allá en Canadá. Se los digo de verdad, que se imaginen estas cosas. Pero bueno, tenemos aquí al profesor Wayne Ross, que él tiene estudios en currículo, pero centrados en las teorías críticas aplicados a los estudios sociales. Entonces, con los discursos de él ampliamos las miradas sobre el papel de los estudios sociales, y ese ha sido un poco el esfuerzo. Realmente es un lujo tenerlo acá. Sé que algunos de ustedes no lo dimensionan porque no han hecho sus lecturas, pero conforme avancen en la carrera, van a ver que sí. Si pueden, tómense en foto con él, porque en el futuro va a ser una carta de presentación. Yo estuve con Wayne Ross. I was with Wayne Ross. I told him to take a photo with you in the future. Algo así. Así que bueno, hoy lo que tenemos es un taller bastante relajado, no es conferencia, no es nada formal. Sentámonos con la confianza de preguntar. Les invito a usar el inglés que tienen. Yo tuve una profesora que decía que sabemos hablar inglés porque estamos muy expuestos al inglés. Entonces no importa si decimos palabras, ¿verdad? La cuestión es darnos a entender. Y si tenemos que hacer mímicas, pues las hacemos. Pero échese al agua, échese al agua. Tenemos también a Karen Granados, que va a ser nuestra traductora, entonces también ella les ayudará. Pero si ustedes quieren hacer la intervención en Spanglish, lo pueden hacer perfectamente. Bien, entonces,
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
¿Cómo está Wayne?
Buena vida.
¿Cómo estás todo?
bien.
Estoy emocionado. Estoy emocionado de be aquí. Está aquí. Yes. I failed Spanish in school. As you can tell why. No translator Carol. And I'm sorry, I apologize that I can't conduct a conversation in Spanish. Well, I can pretty much remember one conversation that I memorized in grade 8.
Bueno, yo estuve en la escuela, en el colegio, estudié español, pero pues no soy muy buen intérprete del español. Entonces, digamos que tuve hasta el 8º grado, llevé español, entonces me disculpo por no poder hacerlo, pero vamos a seguir adelante con esto.
¿Cómo está, señor Méndez? Muy bien, ¿y tú? And then I went on to not do so well in French either.
No me da muy bien el francés tampoco.
But truly, I am really excited to be here, and I want to thank Jessica for making this opportunity for me. And it's my first visit to Costa Rica, and it's a beautiful country. You guys are so friendly, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity.
Estoy muy emocionada de estar aquí. Costa Rica es un país hermoso y agradezco muchísimo a la profesora Jessica por haber permitido que este taller se pueda realizar hoy aquí.
I met Jessica in Colombia several years ago,
Conocí a Jessica en Colombia hace muchos años atrás.
and she came and stayed at the University of British Columbia and did some work there a few years ago. So we got to know each other even better, and so I'm very pleased that she's now hosting me here. ¿Cómo está, señor Méndez? Muy bien, ¿y tú? And then I went on to not do so well in French either. But truly, I am really excited to be here, and I want to thank Jessica for making this opportunity for me. And it's my first visit to Costa Rica, and it's a beautiful country. You guys are so friendly, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity. I met Jessica in Colombia several years ago, and she came and stayed at the University of British Columbia and did some work there a few years ago. So we got to know each other even better, and so I'm very pleased that she's now hosting me here. So I have a PowerPoint that could last until tomorrow. So we're just going to see how I think I've got some ideas that are useful ideas. And I want you to start. I'm going to go over the agenda, and then I'm going to ask you a question, and we'll start with you thinking about having a discussion around the question. So the topic is education for citizenship and social justice. We're not going to get through all these topics, but we're going to try to talk about conflicting conceptions of citizenship, various patterns of citizenship education, conceptions of democracy, and implications for teaching social studies. Please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions at any time. So we'll start with the idea of what is citizenship. And I want to know what you think it is. It's not a test. I just want to know what you think. So as an individual, what's your personal understanding of citizenship and the ways you demonstrate or live out that perspective in your life and or your teaching? So I'd like you to just think about that for a minute or two, and maybe if you want to discuss it with the person next to you, and then we're going to ask for a few volunteers to share out what they think. Okay? So just take a couple of minutes and think about that and have a little discussion.
Y de lo que sí, ciudadanía es como un conjunto de derechos y deberes que van más allá solamente del voto y que implica una participación activa en diversas áreas de la comunidad. Sí.
Just take one more.
One more.
Over here.
Sorry for my bad English, but
Oh,
I'm gonna try.
It sounds great to me.
I think for me, citizenship is a group of persons with the sense of belonging and who it's valid. It's valid for the state valid, the persons who lives and who lives in a good relation with the society who surround it. I don't know, sorry for
No,
English.
that's excellent.
I think it's more a feeling bounded with duties and rights, smart, a feeling, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we'll come back to this before we leave. So maybe you think the same way. Maybe your ideas change towards the end. Who knows? I want to follow up on what's your
Joseph.
Joseph. You made me think. I was born in the United States. I was raised in the United States, and I moved to Canada in 2003 when I was 24. No, that's a little bit older. And I've been teaching citizenship education all of my career. But having the experience of being an immigrant, even a privileged immigrant, had a profound effect on me. And it made me think about this question of belonging that you brought up. You want me to stop there?
It's okay.
Go just a little bit further?
Yes.
I was an American living in Canada, but because of my job and because of my own feeling of responsibility as a social studies educator, I was very involved in the community in terms of discourse around education, around issues around racism, around the treatment of LGBTQ plus people, on many different issues, on violence in schools, etc. Even though I wasn't a citizen, I felt like I belonged. That made me then want to become, even more so, to become a citizen of Canada. Before that, I felt like I'm a citizen of one country, and that causes me enough problems. Now I'm a citizen of two. But the feeling of belonging was important for me to become a Canadian citizen. A feeling of, because of, well, this is a personal story, but because of my own politics, I felt a dissociation with the mainstream politics in the United States, which was part of the reason why I immigrated to Canada. So I feel like I have been on both sides of what you said, Joseph.
Thank you.
I can tell that you guys have had a really critical education around social studies and citizenship. And I'm not surprised. So there are some things in here that might just reinforce what you already know and believe. But I want to put some other questions up on the board that we won't have time to discuss, but I think are important for us to think about and acknowledge. For us to explore all these questions would be an entire course, not just a few hours. Important to have these ideas like in the foreground to be thinking about. A number of you mentioned that citizenship in political and legal theory refers to rights and duties. In political theory, citizens, as opposed to denizens, do you know the term denizens? A subject, a citizen or a subject. Are thought to be, or thought of as free and equal participants in a democratic government of the body politic. So a member of a political community who enjoys rights and assumes duties of membership, right? Citizenship is a state of existence, and it's a privilege. And for me, I think one of the more problematic ways in which I've seen citizenship education discussed in schools, especially in North America, is that there is an assumption that if you're in a place, then you have the privilege. But what I want to say is that that's not always true. You might legally have a right, but you may be, because of your subjectivity, you may not be able to exercise that right. And teachers, we need to be aware of that. So we need to be aware of who our students are. If you were here, if you heard was anybody here yesterday? Yeah, and a few times I talked about everyday life. And I think that that's what we need to be concerned about in social studies. We need to be thinking about the everyday life of the students. Who are they? What are the privileges that they have? Sorry, Carol. What are the privileges that they have? Where are the spaces where their positionalities that keep them from being able to exercise those privileges? We have to be thinking about that. So when we think of traditional conceptions of citizenship, and I'm not going to spend much time on this because you guys know this, I know that now, it's civil rights, political citizenship, and social citizenship. It is the social citizenship that I think does not receive as much attention as it should receive. So, citizenship and capitalism, or neoliberalism, which is the more comfortable word. Is there a permanent tension or contradiction? See or no?
I think yes.
You think yes? What's your name?
Alan.
Alan.
I think yes.
I mean, it's okay if you don't think. If you think no, it's fine. No, it really is. I'm going to try to convince you that there is, but it's fine. So we have the principles of citizenship and the operation of the capitalist market. Now, I would argue, and I did some of this yesterday, that capitalism inevitably involves inequities between social classes. And while citizenship involves some redistribution of resources, because of rights which are shared equally by all, that doesn't mean that, as I said earlier, that everyone, like I can go, it is my right, I have a right to go to any restaurant I want to. But I may not have the economic ability to go to the restaurants that I want to go to. Now, we'll come back to this. I want to talk a little bit about discourses. I'm sorry if I'm being too elementary, just let me know, but a discourse is a link between yourself and your setting. It is a link between identity and history. It's a way to signal and to create a sense of belonging to a larger society. So we have these various discourses that go on in citizenship education, and they're not always in sync. In fact, sometimes they're in opposition. So, two discourses in opposition around citizenship education. Citizenship is viewed as an aspect of bourgeois liberalism, and this is what I mean by that, is that it refers to social class orientation, economic materialism, hedonism, upholding the political and economic interests of the ruling class. Or you have a version of citizenship that's treated as a feature of radical democratic politics. And when I say radical democratic politics, what I'm talking about is participation. It doesn't come, it is an ideological position, but it does not dictate a political ideology beyond the fact that a radical democracy is a democracy in which all subjects/citizens have a right and ability to participate. And that participation is not limited to voting. It's a full social and full political participation in society. Am I making sense? You don't have to agree with me. I just want you to understand me. So we have bourgeois liberalism, we have radical democratic politics. We have passive citizenship, handed down from above. We have active citizenship, which is based on demands and achievements. It's why we have workplace regulations. It's why we have food safety. It's why we have public universities. It's not because it's been handed down from above. It's because the people, in the sense of not the master class, but the working classes, have demanded it. So, what is missing in traditional citizenship discourse? This is my thoughts. I think the traditional concept, I didn't give you a chance to talk about that.
Okay.
So, what is missing in traditional discourse? Usually, in schools, at least in North America, the social processes that undermine citizenship, we don't talk about those. Gender differences and experience in citizenship. Not just gender differences, but differences in sexuality, differences in body, disabilities, orientations, whatever it is. Other types of citizenship, such as economic citizenship. You guys live in a country that is one of the most highest rated democratic countries in the world. But I know this just from reading, and I can see it in my experiences here, and I'm not surprised that economic citizenship is not really at play. That is, there's not an economic democracy. There's not the university's not run as a democracy. Schools are not a democracy. The workplace is not a democracy. Now, I said this yesterday, I'll say it again, that if we want to have democracy as a social relation, then the key area that we need to focus on is economic democracy. And it's the thing that we ignore most of the time in schools. Or at least I'm not blaming you. It's the thing that's not part of the official curriculum. And the last thing is the causes of expansion of citizenship. Social struggle is typically, and I'm not familiar with the Costa Rican curriculum, but social struggle is not a key aspect of teaching about democratic societies in the United States or Canada. It's not there. The only time social struggle is discussed is in a historical perspective. It's never discussed in a contemporary perspective. So in Canada, a part of the official curriculum is the huge general strike in Winnipeg, Manitoba, that happened in the 19-teens. But there's no discussion of the right to strike. There's no discussion of current issues around class struggle.
Here you talk about the privilege of the citizenship. Read this, I have the question about how different is the citizenship in the US than in Canada? What is the difference? That's very interesting because I know it's interesting.
That's a good question, and let Carol do this, and then I'll come right back to that.
Okay.
What's your name again? I know.
Josué.
Josué.
Like Joshua but in Spanish.
Josué. Is that close enough? Josué's question, Canada versus the US citizenship. Imagine this. Imagine the country of Sweden and the United States had a bastard child.
Okay.
And that child actually lived next door to the father, and the mother lives far away. And that's Canada. There is a strain of what really started as populist socialism in Canada with what's called, now I'm going, well, it's not really off topic. There was a party in the province of Saskatchewan, which is in the middle of Canada, and it's a prairie, and there was a political party that was a party of farmers. And the leader of that party, Tommy Douglas, understood the plight of farmers, and this is in the 20th century, and he pushed for what became single-payer health care, socialized medicine, Medicare, whatever. That is a key component of Canadian identity, because Canadians, and I'm saying this as an American, are there any other Canadians here? Good. As an American, a key part of Canadian identity is differentiating yourself from Americans. But Canadians do have this more of a communitarian political perspective on the whole, much more so than the United States.
Okay.
And I'm going to give an example of one of the reasons why I think...
A question more.
Okay.
This is a personal question. Do you feel better than Canadian in the US or American in Canada?
That's a really good... I don't...
Sorry.
I define myself, I call myself an American Canadian. Because I still am active in commenting on US politics publicly. And so I think that's important. So I feel very comfortable as a Canadian. But other Canadians oftentimes judge me as American first, including my students. They criticize me if I have them read too many American authors. And it's fine, and then we have a discussion about it. But Canada is a small country. I mean, what's 5 million people in Costa Rica? There's now 40 million in Canada, but Canada is bringing in 500,000 people a year as immigrants. So the dynamics are changing, but Canada exists like it's living beside an 800-pound gorilla. And that influence economically and politically is very strong. So there's a tension between the socialist perspectives and the inclusivity of official Canadian society and the political pressures that cross the border from the south. Don't tell anybody, but I'm happy. You can tell people this part. I am very happy to pay my taxes in Canada. The tax rates are pretty high. And I have no problem. I never complain about taxes in Canada. But the United States wants to tax me on my income in Canada. And I have no assets in the United States. I do not pay U.S. taxes. So I'm a scofflaw. And I've had many run-ins with the tax authorities. So that too makes me think about the border a lot. And over the years I have, even though my daughter and my grandsons live in the United States, I go to the United States less frequently all the time. Family, and baseball. Those are the two reasons I go to the United States. And whoever's watching this on video, please just edit that part out. Nationality does not equal citizenship. Nationality does not encompass the nuances of what citizenship is. And that's important to remember. There are two common mainstream schools of thought on framing citizenship. There's civic republicanism. Think of Emile Rousseau, Hannah Arendt, that emphasizes civic self-rule, the responsibility of the citizen to the common good. That idea of citizenship is very difficult to find. It's disappearing. And really, in some ways, this civic republicanism is stronger in Canada, much stronger in Canada than it is in the United States. And that's kind of the generalization of what I was giving as an example a while ago. Liberal individualism focuses on rights, and in particular, property rights. Because if you're an individual who has no property, and where I live in Vancouver, we have a huge homeless crisis. We have a housing crisis. For example, right before I left, there was a report that I read that said in my city, where I live in Vancouver, you have to have an income of over $100,000 a year to qualify for a mortgage for the least expensive home in Vancouver. Now, that's an example of a lack of economic citizenship. But it is justified based on this notion of liberal individualism, a neoliberalism, a market-based thing. So the response to people who can't afford a home is either don't live here or get a better job, or those kinds of responses. And what politicians do is they wash their hands of the problem of housing. They wash their hands of the problem of the low rates of wages and the high cost of housing. I could talk for you for hours about that. So I'll stop there. Just focus on this part. Okay, I was talking about nationality and nationalism, and then I'm going to switch it over and talk about global citizenship and cosmopolitanism, which is another discourse. The liberal individual oriented and global citizenship is a summation. It's a merger of two ideas. The liberal individual orientation and the transnational view of responsible citizenship of being a global citizen. It's the merger of those two ideas. So cosmopolitanism emphasizes the world as a borderless, open to all regardless of nationality. That is a goal. That is a goal for cosmopolitanism. And the guiding principles of the idea of a global citizen, of global citizenship, is the idea that the individual, the citizen, is aware of the wider world, respects and values diversity, understands how the world works, is outraged by injustice, participates in community at a range of levels from local to global. This is a discourse that's very strong in terms of environmental democracy or ecological democracy, is willing to act to make the world more equitable and sustainable, and takes responsibility for their actions. You will find this discourse in the official curriculum in many places in Canada and the United States. Now, now we get a little closer to everyday reality of teaching in relation, and still focusing on global citizenship education. You can see that knowledge, skills, and attitudes for global citizenship competency. The knowledge and understandings have these topics: social justice, diversity, globalization, sustainable development, and peace and conflict resolution. The skills: critical thinking, being able to argue effectively, the ability to challenge injustice and inequalities, respect for people and things. This would be, I think, also in the discourse now, maybe not so much in schools, but certainly in universities. There's a discourse of thinking about humans and other non-human living things. And then the attitudes: empathy, self-esteem, self-identity, value and respect for diversity, and this is really important here, the belief that individuals can make a difference. Those are like core areas. So when you see materials, curriculum materials, or you watch teachers who are engaged in teaching from this perspective, these are the characteristics that you're going to see displayed in the classroom. You don't have to, you can just kind of touch on big ideas. Okay. There's a version of global citizenship that is a critical version of it. And I would argue that it's, you know who this is? Right?
¿Saben quién es él, verdad?
It's the cosmopolitan view.
Sí.
Critical global citizenship is an equation that brings cosmopolitanism into the same space as the orientation of challenging the dominant system, where you challenge and address issues of social injustice through inquiry and through active citizenship. Paulo Freire's, this quote is from his book called Teachers as Cultural Workers. And I'm not going to read the whole quote, but basically what he's saying there is that citizenship is not handed from above. Citizenship is a construction, and it's a construction that demands political clarity, it demands organization, it demands the identification of discriminations, and it demands the social struggle to overcome the obstacles of all forms of discrimination. So while I really admire the work of people who adopt the global citizenship framework, but it is the addition of the critical perspective, to me, that makes global citizenship an attractive framework for thinking about what it means to engage your students in thinking about what it means to be a citizen. It's that critical element. Global citizenship education without the critical perspective is an exercise in privilege. Because if you suffer from acute inequalities, whether it's economic, gender, sexual, the body, whatever it is, you're engaged in an everyday struggle to survive. And it is and to tell students to be, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't embrace the ideas of critical global citizenship, but if you just tell them that they need to respect diversity, if you just tell them they need to have agency, if you just tell them they need to have a critical perspective, and you're not acknowledging the places where the students are coming from, if you aren't bringing that critical analysis to them and illustrating to them that they have agency, then you're teaching from a point of privilege, I think. Here's my conclusion. I know we're just a little past halfway in the time. And now I just remembered that the conclusion I want to make is not even on a slide. So this is what I think. And this is what I implore you to consider. I ask you to consider this. That it is our role as social studies educators, as citizenship educators, to create the conditions for our students so that they can construct personally meaningful understandings of the world. And that they understand that they have agency, even if they don't have authority, even if they don't feel like they have power, they have agency, and they can act on the world. They can act on, what do I mean when I say act on the world? They can address the obstacles. They can address the oppressive discourses. They can challenge the oppressive discourses. They don't have to be impolite. All they have to do is resist, even if the resistance is just a little bit. And that if they have that agency to act on the world, that they are making change. And I really believe in the really important part, and this is what has, and I know you guys, you're all teachers, so I know how you think, because you think like I do on this. When I say we want to create conditions for students to create personally meaningful understandings of the world. These are personally meaningful understandings to them, not to you. That means you have to be ready to let go. You have to trust your students. You have to be ready to let go of what you know. And I agree with you. You probably know what's right for them. But you have to let go of that. And you have to create these conditions so that they can come up with an idea that's personally meaningful to them, even if you think it's wrong. Even if you think it's wrong. Now that doesn't mean you just say anything goes, but it means that then you have to be, like Ferrari tells us, we have to be in dialogue with. That's part of the conditions. But the students have to speak for, they have to have voice. I'm going to keep going. The students have to have voice. Too often we do this. We expect students to listen attentively to what experts have to say. And we need to teach them that they need to learn to speak for themselves. They need to learn to speak for themselves. Even if that causes disruption for our own pedagogy. Because oftentimes in situations like this, and I'm sure this doesn't apply to you today, but you're listening to some expert talk and you get bored. And boredom is counter-revolutionary. If students are talking to one another, if they feel like they have voice, and if they feel like they have agency, and they feel like they're content creators, knowledge creators, then what you are doing is you are educating critical citizens. Not future critical citizens. You're educating critical citizens in the now.
Okay, you say something, do the students part of the process of construct their knowledge and critical thoughts by themselves. Some
things that are personally meaningful.
guide.
Yeah, but maybe now I'm not saying that it has to come just from their heads, but in dialogue. That's part of what I was going to write here is creating conditions for construction of personally meaningful understandings. This is our job. We have to create these conditions. And what we want the students to do
Okay, sir. Yeah. This is funny because I was waiting a year to make you this question. And it was a talk that and a discussion that I had with Jessica, and she told me, make this question here, this moment. And it's important for me because I read it, one of your articles, and the name was Dangerous Citizenships. And we need to create the conditions with all of the skills, attitudes, and values that you show us in the last slide. And in the other article, you tell me that if you are a teacher who is neutral, you are a coward. That's your words that I remember. So I discussed with Jessica with that because it's really impressive for me because that word, coward, if you are neutral. And so the question is, how to teach and make these conditions without indoctrinate.
Okay. You can't.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I want to add a caveat. There's a difference between indoctrination and education. But there is no way, it is impossible to have education that is not political.
Okay.
Right? Now we have to start going underneath and say, what do we mean by indoctrination? Do you want to? Okay. I'll give you an example. And it's kind of a multi-layered example. So let's talk about the concept of ideology. Okay, when I was growing up, I was born in 1956. I started school in 1962 in South Carolina, in the midst of extreme apartheid. It wasn't, by that time, it wasn't de jure apartheid. It was de facto apartheid, but there were separate schools for black students and white students. There were separate water fountains. There were separate entrances to restaurants. There were separate places to sit at the movie theater. And if someone said that's an ideological position, what it meant was you're a communist. Because communist was the only ideology. And capitalism isn't an ideology. That's what I mean by the fact. I'll give another example. I gave this example recently. Maybe it was in San Ramon. Who's here that was in San Ramon a couple days ago?
¿Alguien estuvo acá en San Ramón conmigo el martes?
I met somebody here. Well, okay, maybe they're not here.
Bueno.
There were there were these two young fish, and they were swimming through the lake, and it was a beautiful day, and the sun was coming through, and they had a smile on their face, and then there was this big, slow fish, this old fish. It was an old man fish that had gray gills, and he came up to the two young fish and he said, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And then the big fish swam on. And then the two young fish looked at each other and they said, "What the hell is water?" That's ideology. If you're in the water of capitalism, you don't see it. It's just assumed. And then when you see someone who has a different ideology, communist, anarchist, or even just social justice oriented, they look like an aberration because they don't fit in. So when we think about your question, which is absolutely on point, this question, I go back to my favorite philosopher who I talked about yesterday, John Dewey, who really wasn't, well, he's not seen as a critical philosopher, but I think he has a material epistemology, and his pragmatism brings us to the everyday. And I think that is radical. And he says in Democracy and Education, which he wrote in 1916, and I forget which chapter it is, second or third chapter there, it's like in the first sentences, he says, "Education is a means of social control." And then he goes on and says, we can't get around this. No matter what culture, education is a means of social control. So then the question becomes, to what end? So we have a lot of rhetoric around being neutral as a teacher, around we can't bring political messages into school, when in fact everything in school, not just the content, the institution, the architecture, the rules about what goes on in the hall, it is all social control, and it is all social control in a very particular way. And what we experience now, in the 21st century, if you've heard the term 21st century skills, is a rhetoric of the schools exist for the development of human capital. They don't exist for the development of minds and bodies and identities. They exist for the development of human capital that can be extracted and exploited by the owners of property. And you're doing that in the university. I'm implicated in this, as are you. We're doing that in the university. We're doing that in the schools. So you can say you're neutral, but you are telling yourself a lie, because you're not neutral. You don't have to be a revolutionary. I'm not asking you to be a revolutionary, because that is a dangerous thing to be. But it's also, you can be dangerous and you can be safe. It does take a little bit of risk, but it depends on who you are. It depends on the context that you're working in. It depends on who your students are, what your community is, on what you can do. So dangerous citizenship is this idea that is a concept that has to be filled in a situational way by particular individuals in a particular place. But neutrality is not a choice. And your principals, your headmasters, your deans, your university presidents, some of your professors are going to tell you that if you want to survive, you have to be neutral. And that's a lie. That's a lie. You can't. Why is it a lie? Because you can survive and be aware and be critical. You just have to have a plan. And you have to understand what you can do. Don't internalize the values of the institution. Tactically comply. Create space. This is a whole nother lecture. I'm doing a whole nother lecture now. Create spaces. Temporary autonomous zones. Have you ever heard of that term? A temporary autonomous zone. A temporary autonomous zone is kind of like this room without the cameras. We're shut off. We've got the blinds. The doors are shut. I don't think there's anybody on the other side of the mirror over there. And so I can say these things. And nobody at my university is going to come get me. They've already paid for my plane trip down here. So they're not going to, they can deport me, I guess, but, so we have a little space here. And what I'm trying to do here is not to change the Universidad Nacional. I'm not trying to lead a revolution. All I'm trying to say is we've got a little space here, this temporary space, where we can kind of do what we want to do. And you can do that in your classroom too. Keep your hands up. And I'm going to turn it over to, she's got, man, I wish I could understand Spanish so I could tell what you're going to say.
I'm trying to write here. As future social studies teachers, we must address the new challenge left by the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a frequent topic in classes, but the social implications aren't taken in account. So my question will be, did the pandemic numb or activate the sense of power? Political in the most vulnerable generations. How do you think it changed the perception of power?
That is an excellent question, and it's one that is, I think I'm not going to have a satisfying response because I think it's situational. Because the pandemic, everyone wasn't equally affected in the pandemic. There was a discourse that everyone, we're all affected by the pandemic. And, we're all in the same boat. At least that's what they were saying in Canada. But people that say that didn't realize that some people didn't have boats. There were people drowning. So I think it, again, has to do with the positionality of the circumstance that we're talking about. I think that the pandemic created levels of grief, which is a whole nother topic that we just ignore grief. It created levels of grief and isolation, the intensification of grief and isolation and social disconnection, and despondency about the future that if I'm understanding you right, I think I would agree with you, this is what you were saying, that have dramatically affected a generation of people. And my generation, and maybe the generation, just one generation younger than me, were able to sustain themselves in a more effectively, which makes these issues that I've been talking about even more important. I think we as teachers have a lot more power than we give ourselves credit for. The other thing that I think that you do, is possible to do, is that we create value. I don't think that our bosses, however you construct your boss, thinking about teachers or the public, I don't think they see teachers as creating value. I think most of the time, the public and government see teachers as technicians who transmit knowledge and who contribute to the development of human capital, and that's the end of the story. But it's not, because if you've been a student, you've been a teacher, you know that teachers can create value, positive value. But the value is something that is not standardized. What's valuable in one place might not be valuable in another. And so it's difficult to universalize a particular example, but I'm committed in my belief that teachers have the power to create value, to be connected to others, that we have the opportunity to be positive contributors to a democratic society in terms of the production of free human beings that are associated with one another in terms of equality. That we can think about, if we think about democracy as a social phenomenon, then for Dewey, he talks about it as three roots: in free individual existence, in solidarity with others, and in choice of work and other forms of human participation. And those are principles that we can bring into our own pedagogical situations. They are looked differently in Costa Rica than maybe they look in Vancouver. I said this for the first time to my class. It was a class of initial, they're getting ready to go on their practicum. In fact, they're on their short version of their practicum this week, which is one of the reasons why I'm here this week, because my students are out in the schools. And I told them this a few weeks ago. I said, I'm glad I'm not younger. I'm glad I'm not younger. Because I look at my two grandsons who are 3 and 6. And I can't even imagine what the world's going to be for them. But I don't feel like I have. It's not like my parents. My parents. I love my parents. My mom was here yesterday, and my dad always said, and I'm not saying that I'm not trying to put him down for this at all, but it seemed kind of simple. He just said, "Son, you have to get as much education as you can," and that's what I did. And it worked. But you can't say that anymore. You can't just say get as much education as you can and you'll be okay, because that's not true. And what I think it does is it makes us think different. It's not just about getting education. It's not just about getting a credential. It's about the experience. It's about learning who you are as a person. That's why I focus on the job of the students is the construction of personally meaningful understandings. And those things are going to change over time, hopefully. And the condition, what does it mean to create those conditions? Well, I think it means something different depending on the social, political, community conditions where you're working. And I'm not trying to cop out on that, but I'm just saying that I might know how you think, but I don't know how you live, and I don't know anything about your specific community, and you're the best judge of that. and we have to take on that job as teachers, we have to have faith in our own professional judgment. And teachers oftentimes aren't given space to exercise professional judgment, so then that means we have to create spaces, maybe like this, where we can engage in professional judgment. And we have to think about our classrooms as places where we might have to work covertly or subversively to create an experience that's relevant and positive and supportive for students, even if that just means giving them an opportunity to have voice. And I don't want to belittle that, because that's really important. I don't know if that really answers your question, but it is how I feel, for what it's worth. There was another question.
Okay, my question is related to my first question about, you say that the education can be divided on the political, okay? We can divide the education of the political ideas, okay? In our role, teacher, how we can to break the typical patterns. It means we learn a topic, sport topic, in school, repeat it in the high school, repeat it in the university, and repeat it in the citizenship. Okay? You like a citizen, you repeat all of these discourses, political discourses, beyond the educational system. Okay? How we can break these patterns? How we can break these ideas? It's a difficult one.
Well, this is I'm pretty sure I understand what you're saying. Oftentimes, we look at social problems or educational problems, community problems, whatever they are, and they're so huge, and we think that we have so little power and resources that we can't overcome those problems. And most of the time we're right. We can't overcome them as individuals. And even collectively, to think about, let's just put it out there. It's like if we think about if neoliberal capitalism is a problem, and even if we all agree on it right here, right now, today, and we're committed to changing it, we're going to have a hard time changing the structure of society. So first of all, we have to start thinking, and it's not about thinking small, but it is about being tactical. We have to think about what it is that we can do. So, forgive me for repeating Jessica and David, but we start by analyzing the present moment. You know, what is it? What is the problem? What is the main issue? What is the primary contradiction that we're concerned with? And we look around and we try to identify it. Because we're really trying to understand what the situation is. Now I'm going to introduce an example here that's a political example, and it's an example that has a lot of controversy built into it. But it's a good example to talk about this. There's a war going on in Gaza. And if you look at the narrative in mainstream media, mainstream capitalist media, the war in Gaza is the result of Hamas attacking Israel and taking hostages, killing people, bringing the hostages back to Gaza. So we can look at the present moment and we can come to that deduction that this war, the bombing of hospitals, the loss of power, the loss of food, the even stricter siege of Gaza is a direct result of Hamas terrorists breaking through the wall and supposedly indiscriminately, probably indiscriminately killing people and taking them hostage. And we have an understanding. We have that understanding. But if we only stay in the present moment, then our view of the war in Gaza is distorted. So what we have to do next, after we identify what we think the problem is, then we have to look for why did that happen? Why did that event happen? Why are things the way they are in Gaza right now? And the first thing that we have to do is we have to historicize the present moment. We have to turn around and we have to look at the past, and we have to think about what are the historical antecedents that led to the situation of Hamas attacking the civilians in Israel, taking hostages. After we do that, we have to think about how, okay, we historicize the present, we've analyzed the present, we've historicized the historical antecedents, and then we have to think about what would it look like if the major contradictions in that conflict were resolved. You have to think about what the solution, what would it look like? We don't have to really know the solution, but we have to think about what would it look like if this was resolved? And then we come back to the present moment, and we're uplifted a little bit. We're in the present still, but we're ready to understand the present moment in a different way. We're on a higher plane. Once we're there, we have to organize. We have to organize and think about what is that future look? How do we create that future? And as soon as we start to do that, then we have to go through all those steps again and just continue to do that. If we historicize Hamas's attack in Israel, take one step back. What is today? What is today's date? Anybody know? It's the 2nd of November. Do you know what happened on the 2nd of November in 1917? There's no reason to remember this. The Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration. Have you ever heard of that? That was a declaration that was made by the British government that enabled Theodore Herzl, who was an intellectual originator of Zionism, that said, we'll support you and create a space for the creation of a Jewish ethno-state. Herzl wanted to create a Jewish ethno-state in either Uganda or Palestine. I'm not making this up. Uganda or Palestine. Balfour was an anti-Semite, and he did not want Jews in England. That was in 1917. By 1948, Israel was a state. Now, if you don't know that history, and you look only at the present moment, then you think Hamas is the problem. If you deny the history that led to the present moment, or you choose to remain ignorant of it, you'll have a distorted view of the world. What we need to do as social studies teachers, as citizenship educators, is that we need to help our students understand that history is not just a bunch of facts, but when we look, if we ask the question of why things are the way they are, Why am I poor? Why am I discriminated against? Why are there so few people with all the money and so many other people that don't have much money? Then that's actually an empirical question. We can answer that question, but we have to historicize it. Then we have to decide, what are we going to do about it? And then we have to organize. But it doesn't mean that, we may not know what the solution is, because none of us we're not omniscient. We don't have the view of God to see everything that's going on in the world. We can only ever have some partial understanding of the entire system. But that's where we are. I mean, that's a human condition. Humans make history, but they don't make history under conditions that they control. Teachers can make history. We can create these conditions that allow our students to see that they have agency, to understand that when they investigate a social problem, that they ask a question about it, and they do an inquiry into a social problem, that they're actually engaged in changing society just by asking a question. So to me, that's what critical citizenship is. Okay. That's what it is. And we can talk about frameworks, but I can't tell you how to do it where you are, because I'm not you, and I don't live in the community where you live. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to this. But I think if we start to realize certain things, like we create value, that if we have principles like believing in free individual existence, if we believe in having the importance of solidarity with others, if we have faith that dialogue is a path to understanding, and we can get our students to engage in dialogue and to take themselves seriously, and if we can help them understand, we don't have to tell them. In fact, we don't want to show them. We want to put them in a situation where they discover that they have agency, where they experience that. Because, we can do a show and tell about democracy, and that's probably not going to connect with the students that we need to connect with. We need to create these conditions where they actually have that experience. I just want to say one last thing, and if you want to stay here and talk, I'm happy to talk with you. And that is what we need. We're not schools that provide answers. We need schools that provide spaces for students' questions. And the best example of that I know of is the Freedom School movement. It was part of the Civil Rights Movement in the United States. 1964, when they started. And there's a really interesting histories around freedom schools. I encourage you to explore those. But the idea was that these schools were schools for questioning. They were for exposing students to meaningful discussion of experiences, helping them to understand social forces influencing their lives, and hopefully enabling them to manage the social conditions under which they live. Students would be encouraged to ask questions about their experiences and their personal situations. Asking a question was the first step. It's the first step for overcoming a pattern of passive acceptance of authority. To learning how to think, to inquire, and ultimately to convert learning and inquiry into action. I can't think of a better description of a critical, participatory, citizenship-oriented pedagogy, then that slide right there, I mean, those things. Now, it's not easy to do because you have to overcome the expectations of your peers. You have to overcome the expectations of authorities, maybe the parents and the community. And frankly, if you teach in a more privileged and affluent school community, you're going to have more trouble doing this than if you teach in an impoverished community. That's my experience. I mean, that's just my experience. Why? Because the authorities don't care about the impoverished communities. The authorities and the master class don't believe that anything can come from impoverished communities. And privileged communities want to protect their privilege. So if student starts asking questions, they're going to come asking you questions. Why aren't you teaching X, Y, or Z? But I think this is really I think this is a great example. It's an exemplar. I really enjoyed this opportunity. I thank Jessica again for this. I am really sorry that I can't engage with you in Spanish. I'm sorry that what else am I sorry for? This is a characteristic of Canadians. They say sorry all the time. I'm sorry that we don't have more time. But I feel privileged to have been here. I really appreciate your questions. Jessica and David and your teachers obviously are doing a fantastic job. And I really appreciate the difficult questions. And I hope you don't think I'm trying to sidestep by not giving specific answers, but I believe in the school of questioning. And so thank you for staying.